Sarah, let's start with you. First of all, your legal point of view on this.
hmm Well, from a legal standpoint, this is a sealed indictment. And until it's unsealed, we really don't have the answers in terms of what the charges are and who is being charged. Because from the beginning of this investigation, as anxious as we are for answers, what we've known is that there's little that we know about this. We don't know who's actually
Yeah.
involved. We don't know what the charges are. And so, even though this is a huge step towards getting the answers that we're looking for, and that these are the first charges that have been brought by a grand jury, we still don't really know for certain. And what I find really interesting about this is that there's an arrest plan that on Monday, either people will be turning themselves in or the law enforcement is going to arrest them. To me, that signifies that there is a source with it very high up within law enforcement that has provided this information. Because in terms of the indictment, judges, court clerks, and sometimes the U.S. Attorney's Office, certainly the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General's Office are aware of what those charges are and who is involved. But in terms of the arrest plan and when and how and who is going to be arrested, that is something strictly within law enforcement's, discretion and knowledge.
Why are the charges sealed? Is that common?
The charges are a lot of times sealed because of the sensitive information here. Clearly, we're dealing with national security. We're dealing with potential collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. We're dealing with claims of obstruction of justice by President Trump, who may have impeded the investigation. We're dealing with these very sensitive issues that involve national security. So I think that it's not surprising that the indictment is sealed, at least until these individuals are going to turn themselves in or be arrested.
How much information do the investigators need to file a charge? I'm just wondering what the legal standard is here, because we got to remind our audience: just because you charge somebody doesn't mean in the end that that person is going to be found guilty, that you're going to get the conviction.
Of course, and when you go before a grand jury and provide subpoena documents and testimony, you're trying to show a different story. It's beyond a reasonable doubt that has to be proven to a jury for these individuals to actually be found guilty of those charges.
One more on the legal side of things. We have some explaining to do for our international audience. The legal process here won't be familiar with everyone. It wasn't with me. Why did a grand jury have to approve the charges? What does the grand jury do here?
Well, the grand jury, so the Attorney General's office has basically just given its stamp of approval that these charges could be brought to a grand jury for indictment. And a grand jury is the equivalent of what we also know as a preliminary hearing, where a court, or in this case a grand jury, decides that there's enough evidence, there's enough probable cause to bring these charges and proceed to trial. It does not mean that the person's guilty. It just means that the charges can actually be filed. If the grand jury doesn't find probable cause that a crime was committed and these individuals committed the crime, then obviously there is no indictment. Here we know, and this is why this is such a huge development today, is that the grand jury does believe that there are certain individuals that were guilty of offenses here, possibly collusion, obstruction of justice, and crimes of that sort that we know this investigation has been about. So it is a huge step, and I think that a grand jury indictment is pretty serious. I mean, it doesn't implicate guilt necessarily, but it definitely is a huge step towards prosecuting an individual.